Have you ever felt the distance between who you are on a Friday afternoon and who you have to be on Monday morning? That gap has been there longer than you know. Sunday, 5 o'clock, something shifts in your chest. Not anxiety exactly, a bracing. Because in 14 hours, you have to be somewhere and you have to be someone. The professional version. The one who nods in the right meetings, laughs at the right moments, never lets anyone see what this is actually costing. We assume this is just being professional, necessary, harmless. But researchers who study identity disagree. What they found isn't about burnout. The mask doesn't make you fake. It makes you disappear. And the timeline is faster than you think. 3 specific ways it's already happening. And the exact point where you need to know it's gone too far. There's a word for the professional version you put on every morning. He spent years inside the corporate system, learning what companies expected, getting yelled at when he fell short, until he could run the whole performance on autopilot. He called it the avatar, a version of yourself so rehearsed and so automatic that your physical body can stay in the room while your actual mind is entirely somewhere else. He said leaving the office at the end of the day felt like unplugging from a simulation. And when people asked what he did for a living, he answered, but with a quiet shame, because the words that came out weren't really his. It was just the avatar talking, finishing out the contract. Now, the philosopher Robert Greene would say that's not a tragedy, it's a strategy. He wrote that the workplace is a theater, and the mask is your survival tool. That if we showed up as our full, unfiltered selves all the time, we would be despised. The mask is social intelligence. Wear it proudly. And he isn't entirely wrong. The mask works. It protects us. Most of us would not last a week in our jobs without it. But here is what Greene didn't fully account for. What happens when you forget you're wearing one? For almost all of human history, a separate professional self was impossible. If you were a blacksmith in a medieval village, there was no work version and home version of you. The entire community knew you. Your neighbors were your clients. Your family was your business. Life and labor were one continuous, unbroken thing. Then the Industrial Revolution arrived. Millions of people were ripped from their fields and pushed into factories and offices. For the first time in history, we were forced to work cooperatively all day, every day, with complete strangers, people who had no idea who we actually were. And the modern institution demanded something that had never been required before, a compartmentalized self. Karl Marx identified this turning point as the alienation of labor, when work was broken down into isolated, repetitive tasks on an assembly line. The worker was cut off from the actual meaning of what they were making. Work became an external activity, something done for survival, not something that reflected who you were. What we inherited from that revolution is the expectation that we split in two. The person we are at home with the people who love us, and the professional front, polished, controlled, performing to the standards of an institution that doesn't actually know us, and, if we're honest, doesn't particularly want to. We have been living this way for so long we've mistaken it for human nature. It is a historical accident, one that most of us have never once questioned. In January 2007, the Washington Post ran a social experiment. They placed one of the greatest musicians in the world inside a Washington, D.C. train station during the morning rush hour. Joshua Bell had played a sold-out concert hall in Boston just 2 nights before, close to $100 a ticket. He stood in a freezing station in jeans and a baseball cap and played for 45 continuous minutes, 6 classical pieces by Bach, on a handcrafted violin worth $3.5 million. Approximately 2,000 people walked past him. 6 stopped. About 20 tossed some coins without breaking stride. When his final note finished, there was absolute silence. No applause, no crowd, 0 recognition. We tell ourselves we would have stopped. The data says otherwise. And the data also tells us why. During World War II, a psychologist named Norman Mackworth studied Royal Air Force radar operators. Their job was to stare at screens in dark rooms for hours on end, watching for signals that could mean the difference between life and death. High stakes, serious work. Mackworth discovered something that unsettled everyone who read his findings. After just 10 minutes of monotony, the quality of their attention collapsed. After 30 minutes, they had stopped registering what was in front of them entirely. The human brain requires novelty to stay switched on. When daily life becomes a predictable loop, same commute, same desk, same inbox, same people asking the same things, our nervous system treats it like that radar screen. It stops registering the world, not because we're lazy, because our biology, very literally, powers down. We arrive at our desk already partially offline. And then there is the second layer. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the state where we are so absorbed in something that effort stops feeling like effort, where the work and the person doing it briefly become the same thing, where we produce our best thinking, our most original ideas, the work that actually means something. To reach that state takes approximately 15 to 20 minutes of uninterrupted focus. In most modern offices, we never get there. A notification appears, a meeting starts, someone needs something urgent that turns out not to be urgent. We are pulled back to the surface before we ever went deep. We spend our days in the shallows, never diving, burning enormous amounts of mental energy, just switching between tasks. Arriving home exhausted from work, we can barely remember doing. And we cannot figure out why we feel like we're disappearing. This is why the commuters walked past Joshua Bell. It was not that they lacked taste. It was not that they were bad people. They were running on the same autopilot we all learn to build to survive. And autopilot does not stop for beauty. It does not stop for a $3.5 million violin. It does not stop for anything that wasn't already in the schedule. The grind doesn't just exhaust us, it makes us deaf. Here's where it gets harder to hear. The mask doesn't just numb our senses over time, it rewires the person wearing it. The behavioral economist Dan Ariely ran an experiment with counterfeit designer products. He gave participants either genuine or fake designer sunglasses, then observed their behavior in a series of tasks. The people wearing the counterfeit glasses were significantly more likely to cheat. The explanation is something Ariely called self-signaling. We don't have direct privileged access to our own character. We watch what we do, and we conclude who we are from the evidence. When we wear something fake, when we perform a version of ourselves that isn't real, we silently broadcast to ourselves that we are not the genuine article. And once that signal is sent, it lowers every behavior that follows. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment showed the same mechanism operating at a far more frightening scale. Healthy, psychologically stable students were randomly assigned to act as prison guards. Within days, not weeks, days, they began to exhibit genuinely cruel and sadistic behavior. They did not choose to become that. The role chose them. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Every time we make a choice, we are turning the central part of ourselves, the part that chooses, into something slightly different from what it was before. The performance becomes the person." And the neuroscience adds a number to this that I want you to sit with for a moment. By the time we reach our mid-30s, researchers estimate that approximately 95% of who we are is a memorized set of behaviors, emotional reactions, and unconscious attitudes running automatically like a computer program we didn't install and never agreed to run. The avatar stops being something we put on in the morning. It becomes the operating system. And the person underneath, the one with the actual opinions, the unconventional thoughts, the things that make us strange and specific and worth knowing, that person has less and less access to the controls. We think we're managing the performance. The performance is managing us. Most people don't discover this until it's too late to do much about it. Research shows that more than half of people who take early retirement packages return to work within 3 months. Not because they ran out of money, because they didn't know who they were without the title. The job had been quietly providing three things they hadn't realized they were depending on: daily structure, a sense of purpose, and a built-in community. When those disappeared, the self they assumed would be waiting, the one who was going to finally relax and enjoy the freedom, simply wasn't there. 1 in 5 people experience mild to severe depression in the transition out of work. For 10%, the psychological collapse is severe. The suicide rate for men in retirement is 4 times higher than at any other stage in their lives. 4 times. These are not people who failed. These are people who succeeded at the professional performance for decades, so completely, for so long, that the performer and the performance became indistinguishable. When the curtain came down, there was nothing left to take home. The sociologist Irving Goffman called the professional front, the front region, the stage, and he identified something chilling about what happens to long-term performers. The mask we wear to survive gradually becomes second nature, an integral part of our personality. We stop playing a role, we become it. I want to tell you what this looked like for me. I spent 10 years as a dental assistant, 10 years of the suction noise, the sore neck, the running up and down stairs for instruments, 10 years of the professional version of me showing up reliably, competent, steady, agreeable, while the actual me was somewhere else entirely. I left, and then I walked into a corporate contact center thinking, this is different, this is growth. I was good at it. I won the awards. The metrics loved me. Consecutive months of being exactly what the institution wanted. But I could feel the gap between who I was at work and who I was on the weekends getting wider with every passing month. I'd come home brain fried, not from doing hard things, but from the performance, from maintaining a version of myself that had nothing to do with who I actually was. The thing that finally cracked it wasn't dramatic. I had been working toward an internal transfer, and I watched my manager move, very deliberately, to block it. Not because I wasn't ready, not because the other team didn't want me, but because I was producing results where I was, and it was convenient to keep me there. That was the moment, not because of the injustice of it, though that was real, but because of the word that arrived in my mind to describe what had happened. Asset. I was an asset being managed, inventory being protected, and I realized that every version of me I had constructed to survive that place, the agreeable one, the high-performing one, the one that smiled through the KPI reviews, had been built in service of someone else's balance sheet, not mine. I handed in my resignation. Walking out of that building for the last time, I felt something I wasn't expecting. Not triumph, not even relief, exactly. Something quieter than that. Like taking off a coat I'd been wearing for so long I'd forgotten it had weight. And then came the harder part, figuring out who was underneath. Here is what I have learned about the moment people finally see the avatar. It is never cinematic. One person described sitting in a standard meeting, noticing that his body was in the room, but his actual mind had completely moved on, and realizing that only the avatar remained, finishing out the contract. He later calculated that he had traded 54,000 hours, 6 full years of his one finite life, for a salary, without ever consciously deciding to do so. An entrepreneur described his moment in the middle of a freezing winter storm, sick, exhausted, staring at the ceiling of his car, asking himself, what am I actually doing? Is this what my life has become? The pattern is always the same. It is not failure that cracks the avatar. It is a moment of contrast, the exact second when the distance between who you actually are and what you are doing to get through the day becomes too wide to look away from. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The cage, as someone once said, had always had a door. You just needed to notice it. I want to be very clear about what I am not saying. This is not a video that ends with quit your job. The avatar is not the enemy. Green was right. It is a tool and it works. The problem is not wearing the mask. The problem is when the mask starts wearing you. And there are 3 specific ways to stop that from happening. 3 people who have thought about this more carefully than most. and who said it in 3 different ways that I keep returning to. The first is from the investor Paul Graham, who wrote that we should keep our identity small. The more labels we attach to ourselves, high performer, manager, the person who always delivers, the more fragile we become, because every label is something we have to defend. And defending labels uses up the exact energy we need for actually thinking, actually creating, actually being present in our own lives. Strip the labels back, see what remains. That remainder, the part that can't be titled or measured, is the part worth protecting. The second is from the philosopher Naval Ravikant, drawing on a Buddhist principle. Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. Read that again slowly. The avatar is all tension. The professional front, the performance, the management of how others perceive us. It costs enormous amounts of biological energy to maintain every single day for decades. We have normalized that cost so completely that we mistake exhaustion for diligence. Relaxation, in this context, isn't laziness. It's contact with the actual self, the one that exists before the performance begins. And the third is the simplest and maybe the most immediately practical. The job is a transaction, nothing more. I perform a service, I get paid, not a calling, not a reflection of my worth as a human being, not the answer to the question of who I am, a transaction. The moment we truly believe that, not as a coping mechanism, but as a clear and accurate description of what employment actually is, the avatar loses its grip. It becomes something we pick up in the morning and put down at the end of the day. And the person doing the picking up and putting down, that's you. Underneath, intact, here's why any of this belongs on a channel about money. Because money is the mechanism by which the transaction becomes optional. When your income doesn't require your physical presence every single day, you stop needing the avatar to survive. You can choose when to wear it, for how long, for whom. That's not a fantasy. It's a sequence of decisions made early enough, compounded patiently enough. We're going to talk about exactly what that sequence looks like. But before any of that, notice the gap. The gap between who you are at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and who you have to be at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. That gap is telling you something, and you were always capable of doing something about it. Fare thee well.